It began on a misty Texas morning, the kind where everything feels calm, almost too calm. Sunlight struggled through low fog as Ethan Parker washed his truck, trying to live a quiet life he'd fought hard to earn. Then a gray Malibu rolled up. Two men in orange vests stepped out, flashing fake badges and polite smiles. They said they were with the HOA. They lied. Minutes later, Sarah Parker was on the ground, ribs shattered. And the man who'd sworn he'd left the battlefield behind felt something inside him snap. What followed wasn't chaos. It was precision. 6 seconds. 6 rounds. A masterclass in controlled fury. Because peace is beautiful, until someone tries to take it from the wrong man. It was one of those mornings that felt almost rehearsed in its perfection. The kind that makes you forget life ever carried sharp edges. The sun crept over the oaks, spilling gold across the manicured lawns of Brookhaven Hills. Sprinklers whispered over trimmed grass. The air smelled faintly of wet cedar, and somewhere down the block a dog barked without urgency. Ethan leaned against the hood of his Ford F-150, watching the water bead and slide off the metal like liquid glass. For the first time in years, the rhythm of his breathing matched the world around him. He thought maybe, just maybe, he had finally outrun the noise that used to live inside his head. Sarah moved about the driveway with quiet purpose, unpacking groceries from the trunk, the hem of her pale blue sundress catching morning light. There was something almost sacred about her calm, something Ethan didn't dare disturb. 7 years had passed since his last deployment, and though he never said it aloud, he still counted peace in days, not years. Each sunrise without a siren, each night without a jolt from dreams of Fallujah, felt like an unspoken victory. He didn't talk about being a Navy SEAL anymore. Around here, he was just Ethan, the guy who fixed his own fence, who waved to neighbors, who tried to remember what ordinary felt like. But even ordinary has a pulse, and that morning, it skipped. Sarah paused mid-step, her eyes narrowing toward the street. A gray Chevy Malibu idled by the corner for a moment too long. Its windows were tinted, its engine barely humming, yet the stillness it left behind was louder than any noise. Ethan caught her gaze, forced a smile, and shrugged it off. "Probably lost," he said. She nodded, but not convincingly. The Malibu turned the corner, and with it went the comfort of the morning. It's strange how peace and danger can share the same space. The scent of fresh-cut grass lingered in the air, but so did a faint unease, the kind you can't name, only feel. Sarah carried another bag inside, but Ethan stayed behind, a towel slung over his shoulder. His reflection stared back from the truck's polished surface. Older eyes, steadier hands. A body that still remembered commands before the mind gave them. Old habits whispered quietly. The way his gaze swept rooftops. The way his ears parsed distant sounds. He told himself those instincts were behind him, boxed up with the uniform folded in storage. Yet beneath the calm, something stirred. He knelt to coil the hose, but his mind replayed the car's slow roll past their home the night before. It had come by twice that week, maybe 3 times, headlights dimmed, too slow to be innocent. He tried to reason with himself. Wrong address, late-night delivery driver, coincidence. Still, the air felt heavier now, as if the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. He looked at the front porch where Sarah had placed a vase of wildflowers. Simple things had always grounded him. But peace, he knew, was fragile. A surface that could crack under the smallest pressure. As he turned toward the house, he caught a sound. So faint he almost dismissed it. A metallic click, somewhere near the back fence. Not loud but deliberate. He straightened slowly, scanning, eyes narrowing against the glare. Nothing moved except a distant flag rippling in the breeze. He laughed under his breath, the kind of laugh meant to chase away ghosts. "You're not over there anymore," he muttered to himself, though part of him wasn't sure he believed it. Inside, Sarah called his name, her voice soft and untroubled. he answered, letting the door close behind him. But the click echoed in his mind long after. Peace was supposed to be simple. Clean lines, quiet mornings, shared coffee. Yet he couldn't shake the thought that sometimes, before the storm, the world becomes too still. The kind of stillness that doesn't soothe you. The kind that warns you something's watching. It started with small things, the kind you barely notice until they add up and whisper that something's wrong. A missing package here, a broken camera there. Sarah mentioned it over breakfast one morning, lightly at first, like she was testing whether the words themselves would sound paranoid once spoken aloud. Did you see the Hendersons' mailbox? It's bent again. And the Willis family's doorbell camera stopped recording last night. Ethan looked up from his coffee, caught the flicker of concern behind her casual tone, and told her not to worry. Maybe the mail truck clipped it. Maybe the battery died. He wanted the explanation to be that simple, because admitting otherwise meant inviting a part of himself back that he'd spent years trying to silence. But Sarah noticed everything. She had the quiet vigilance of someone who's lived through fear before, the kind that doesn't announce itself but lingers in the corners of your vision. She started locking the doors earlier, drawing the blinds even when sunlight still filled the kitchen. She'd pause mid-conversation when headlights washed across the windows, her hand unconsciously resting against her ribs. A memory from another time, another trauma. Ethan saw it and something in him stirred, but he pushed it down. He told himself peace required trust, and trust meant not seeing ghosts in every shadow. The neighborhood had changed lately. Construction trucks lined the far end of Brookhaven Hills, heavy machinery roaring from dawn to dusk. The new development promised progress, modern townhomes, higher property values, a fresh face for the community. But with progress came politics, and in the center of it all stood Richard Caney, the new HOA president. Charismatic, polished, and always smiling, Caney made promises about neighborhood integrity that sounded noble on paper but felt like control in practice. He handed out citations for overgrown hedges, unauthorized structures, even a wrong shade of fence paint. People joked that he was running Brookhaven like a military base, but Ethan, who had lived under real command, recognized something more strategic in Caney's charm. Still, Ethan kept his distance. He had no interest in HOA politics, no patience for petty power games. He'd fought real wars. He wasn't about to get drawn into a suburban one. So, when Sarah mentioned seeing unfamiliar men loitering by the mailboxes, clipboard in hand, he brushed it off. They're probably contractors, he said. Or delivery guys. The words came too easily, too practiced. It's amazing how quickly denial becomes a habit when you want to protect the illusion of safety. But denial can't erase instinct. And instinct, once trained, never fully dies. Some nights, Ethan found himself awake before dawn. Not from nightmares, but from silence. He'd sit by the window, scanning the street the way he once scanned ridgelines overseas, measuring angles, memorizing patterns, searching for something that didn't belong. That's when he noticed it again. The gray Malibu, parked too far down the block to be casual, engine idling just long enough to register before it slid out of sight. The first time he told himself it was coincidence. The second time, he told himself it was paranoia. By the third, he stopped making excuses. It's a strange thing, feeling powerless in your own home. A man who once commanded chaos now second-guessed his own senses. Every creak of wood, every motion light flickering to life, felt like a test. Sarah would catch him glancing out the window and ask, "What are you looking for?" He'd force a smile and say, "Nothing. Just making sure the motion sensor's working." But inside, something old was waking up. The soldier he thought he'd buried beneath routine and quiet. That part of him didn't trust coincidences. It cataloged them. It waited. The unease grew sharper with each passing week. Packages disappeared from porches. A neighbor's car was keyed with the words, Move out. Someone's garden fence was knocked down overnight. Small acts, but all carrying the same signature. A message. You're not safe here. Sarah's voice became more insistent. Ethan, this isn't random. Someone's doing this. But he wanted to believe in normalcy. He wanted to believe that violence only lived in the past, that he didn't have to be that man anymore. So he gave the answer that hurt her most. Silence. When people talk about intuition, they make it sound mystical. In reality, it's pattern recognition, the body remembering before the mind does. Sarah's intuition was screaming, but Ethan's was fighting its own war. The part of him that knew how to handle danger versus the part that feared what using that knowledge would make him again. That's the trap of peace. It can make even the strong doubt their instincts. Then, one night, while taking out the trash, he saw the gray Malibu again. The headlights off, engine faint. This time it wasn't parked, it was creeping. He caught the glow of a cigarette tip from the driver's seat, a faint ember in the dark. His pulse slowed, not sped up. The same calm he'd felt before clearing a breach. He memorized the license plate, the angle of the headlights, the sound of the engine as it pulled away. And in that moment, he realized the soldier in him had never left. He'd just been waiting for permission to return. But permission wasn't the same as readiness. When he came back inside, Sarah was waiting by the door. "You saw it, didn't you?" she asked quietly. Ethan nodded. The first honest admission he'd made in weeks. She reached for his hand, and for a second they both stood there, the air between them heavy with what neither wanted to say out loud. The world outside their front door was changing, and not for the better. From that night on, the Malibu became more than just a car. It became a shadow stitched into the fabric of their days. Sometimes it appeared at the far end of the block, sometimes behind them at the grocery store. Always near, never close enough to confront. And as days turned into weeks, that shadow began to erode the edges of their peace. One quiet, calculated sighting at a time. Some stories don't begin with villains in dark alleys. They start with men in polos and clipboards, smiling like customer service agents. That's how Troy Maddox and Cal Rivers moved through the neighborhoods of Brookhaven Hills. Two men who looked like they belonged, who spoke with just enough confidence to be mistaken for authority. They weren't thugs in the traditional sense. They were professionals in deception, dressed for comfort, not chaos. Troy, tall and broad-shouldered, carried himself like someone used to getting his way. Cal, shorter and dense, followed with the quiet intensity of a man who did the work no one else wanted to. Together, they made a convincing pair of HOA enforcement officers, complete with laminated badges, safety vests, and an old clipboard filled with fake citations. But their real job wasn't compliance. It was pressure. Subtle at first, suffocating later. The man behind them was Richard Kane, a name that carried weight at every board meeting and cocktail party in the city. On paper, he was a real estate visionary, talking about revitalization, community upgrades, and sustainable value. Behind closed doors, he was a shark, the kind that smiled before biting. He saw Brookhaven Hills not as a neighborhood, but as an opportunity. The aging homes, the quiet streets, they were assets waiting to be flipped into high-end townhouses. All he needed was a little encouragement to convince the holdouts to sell. That's where Troy and Cal came in. For a price that fit neatly into an unmarked envelope, Caney bought himself a campaign of fear. Their coordination was meticulous. They met after dark in empty parking lots or roadside diners, scribbling notes under the yellow glow of neon lights. Surveillance photos littered the table, driveways, license plates, even faces captured through cracked blinds. The trunk of the gray Malibu had become their toolkit. Crowbars, stolen mail, zip ties, a small stack of counterfeit HOA letters ready to deliver. They called it soft pressure, the kind that didn't draw police attention but left people nervous enough to pack their boxes. It worked, too. Most families weren't built for confrontation. They just wanted peace. By the time Ethan and Sarah's names made it onto that list, half the block had already caved. But Ethan wasn't most people. Caney's men didn't know that yet. They didn't understand that intimidation was a language he spoke fluently. Still, at home, that experience felt like a curse, not a gift. He didn't want to be the man who saw threats in shadows. So, when Sarah brought it up again, the packages, the Malibu, the men pretending to be HOA officers, he tried to reason it away. "I'll handle it," he said, but his tone carried no conviction. She looked at him the way someone looks at a person they love, but no longer feels safe believing. "Ethan, handling it means doing something, not pretending it's fine." He didn't respond. Sometimes silence is easier than admitting fear. Inside their home, tension replaced comfort. The laughter that once filled their kitchen grew scarce. Sarah started closing curtains earlier, unplugging electronics when they left the house. She felt watched. Ethan wanted to tell her that he did too, that the old instincts were whispering again. But he couldn't. He was supposed to be her anchor, not another source of worry. Yet each day he found himself replaying the same loop. The Malibu idling near the corner, the faint glow of a cigarette, the slow turn of the wheel as it drifted out of sight. It wasn't random. It was surveillance. And deep down, he knew that once someone studies you long enough, they stop observing. They start planning. Meanwhile, Troy and Cal were growing bolder. They operated under Caney's directive to make it uncomfortable. They vandalized security cameras, tampered with mailboxes, even dropped warning letters disguised as HOA notices. The tone was always polite, but the words were designed to bleed anxiety. Property non-compliance will result in fines. Neighborhood standards must be enforced. The power of suggestion did the rest. The beauty of their scheme was that it wore the mask of bureaucracy. No threats, no fingerprints, just the illusion of authority. Most people obey forms before they question them. That was Kane's genius. But power has a way of breeding arrogance, and arrogance makes men sloppy. One night, at a roadside bar 2 towns over, Troy boasted to a waitress that he was cleaning out a block full of freeloaders. He laughed when she asked what he meant, tipping his beer back and saying, "Let's just say they'll sell soon enough." Cal wasn't as loud, but his guilt was quieter, more corrosive. He had a family once, before the record, before the debt. This job was supposed to be temporary, a way out. But as he watched Troy snap photos of people's homes, he realized the line between intimidation and criminality had already blurred beyond recognition. Back in Brookhaven Hills, the Malibu became an omen. Sarah began noticing it even when it wasn't there. A reflection in a window, a sound that mimicked an idling engine. Each one sent a ripple through her calm. Ethan started writing down plate numbers, dates, and times, though he never told her. Guilt was heavy, not just for ignoring her earlier warnings, but for the quiet acknowledgement that she had been right all along. The feeling of being hunted doesn't come suddenly. It creeps in, like a draft through a closed door. You feel it before you name it. And still, they didn't call the police. Pride, disbelief, denial. It's hard to admit that evil can wear a name tag. That's the thing about authority. When it's faked well enough, ordinary people question themselves before they question the uniform. Ethan had seen that overseas, in places where uniforms meant life or death depending on who wore them. Now he was seeing it again, here, in the one place he thought was safe. The irony, of course, is that we, the audience, know more than they do. We can see the danger coiling around them, the pattern tightening. We know Caney's greed will eventually clash with Ethan's discipline, that 2 men acting under orders are walking toward someone who has lived his life following them. But inside that house, they don't know that yet. They're just a husband and wife trying to hold on to the illusion of peace, unaware that the storm has already chosen their address. It happened on a Saturday that began like any other. The kind of day where sunlight spills across the driveway, where peace feels like something you can hold in your hands. Ethan was rinsing the hood of his truck, the sound of the hose steady and rhythmic, when two figures appeared at the edge of the property. At first glance, they seemed harmless. Men in faded safety vests with clipboards, the kind you see taking notes on sidewalk repairs or meter readings. They smiled as they approached, but their smiles didn't reach their eyes. There was something performative about it, something too deliberate. Sarah noticed first. She set down the grocery bag she was carrying and wiped her palms against her dress. "Can I help you?" she asked. The taller man, Troy, flipped open a cheap leather folder and flashed a plastic badge that caught the light. "Afternoon, ma'am. We're with the Brookhaven Hills Homeowners Association Enforcement Division." His tone was authoritative, almost rehearsed. He gestured to the clipboard. "We've had reports of multiple violations at this address: unregistered vehicles, improper trash disposal, and unapproved exterior fixtures." Sarah blinked, taken aback. "There is no HOA on this street," she said, her voice polite but firm. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. But Troy didn't like being corrected. His face shifted, the charm slipping away to reveal something colder. "Ma'am, I'm just trying to do my job," he said, his words dipped in irritation. Cal, standing a few steps behind, adjusted his vest and looked around the yard as if searching for evidence of wrongdoing. The scene was so absurd it almost seemed laughable, until Troy stepped closer, closing the space between them. "You folks don't want to make this difficult," he muttered. Ethan turned off the hose. The sudden silence felt heavy, as if even the birds had paused. He stepped forward, voice calm but measured. "What's this about?" he asked. Troy's eyes flicked toward him, evaluating, maybe even recognizing something in Ethan's posture. The squared shoulders, the stillness that wasn't submission but calculation. "Just enforcing the rules," Troy said, dismissive. "Your wife's been argumentative. Maybe you should step in before we have to write up a citation." Sarah's breath hitched. Something in her expression hardened, a line drawn quietly but unmistakably. "I don't think you understand," she said, steady now. "We don't have an HOA. You're trespassing. It should have ended there. But power, even fake power, can't stand being denied." Troy's hand shot out, fingers closing around her upper arm. It was fast. Too fast for Ethan to move before it happened. Sarah gasped, twisting to pull free, but Troy shoved her hard, his palm flat against her shoulder. The motion sent her backward, her heel catching the edge of the curb. The sound that followed didn't belong in a peaceful neighborhood. A dull, cracking impact, the kind that cuts through every other noise. Sarah hit the pavement with a sound that Ethan would replay for years in his mind. The crack of bone, the sharp inhale that never fully became a scream. Time fractured in that moment. The air thickened. Ethan didn't think. He moved. He closed the distance before Troy could react, his body remembering what his mind had tried to forget. There was no hesitation, no conscious thought, just muscle memory firing in perfect sequence. He caught Troy's wrist mid-motion, turned his hips, and redirected the force downward. It was a move burned into him from 100 drills. Clean, efficient, merciless. Troy's back hit the driveway with a hollow thud, air leaving his lungs in a sharp grunt. The clipboard clattered beside him, papers scattering like startled birds. Cal, startled by the sudden violence, stumbled backward, his eyes darting between Troy and Ethan. For a brief second, Ethan saw confusion flicker across his face, then resolve. Cal's hand went to his belt, and the faint glint of metal caught the sun. A knife. Not hesitation this time, but intent. Ethan positioned himself instinctively between Sarah and the threat, his mind mapping angles, distances, reactions. He needed to move, to close the gap. But he also needed time. Seconds that didn't exist. Behind him, Sarah tried to sit up, one arm clutching her side. Her voice came out strained, barely more than a whisper. "Ethan!" He turned his head just enough to see her digging through her fallen purse, her face pale but determined. Her hand emerged clutching a small black canister. It was instinct for her, too, though born from fear, not training. The first hiss of pepper spray cut through the moment like a fuse being lit. The mist hit Cal square in the face. He screamed, staggering back, his knife dropping to the ground with a dull metallic ring. Sarah coughed, the motion sending pain through her ribs. But she didn't stop. Her hand trembled, yet her aim stayed steady. Cal clawed at his eyes, choking on curses, stumbling into the lawn sprinklers that had kicked on again as if mocking him. For Ethan, that was all the time he needed. His eyes darted toward the porch, toward the hidden panel behind the column, where his safe was built into the wall. It wasn't paranoia that made him install it years ago. It was habit, preparation, the kind of quiet vigilance that never truly leaves a soldier. He moved fast, grabbing the edge of the panel, fingers finding the latch by memory. The click of the release felt louder than it should have. Inside, nestled in black foam, was the M4 carbine he hadn't touched in years. Clean, oiled, waiting. His breath steadied the moment his hand closed around the grip. The familiar weight grounded him, like slipping back into a language he hadn't spoken but never forgot. He checked the chamber out of instinct, flicked the safety, and turned. Troy was scrambling to his feet, blood at the corner of his mouth, rage overtaking fear. Cal was half blind, stumbling toward the car, hands outstretched. "Step away from her," Ethan said, voice calm, low, final. There was no shouting, no shaking hands. The soldier was awake now, and he spoke with precision. For a moment, even Troy hesitated, as if some primal part of him recognized the danger in that tone, the kind of authority that doesn't need volume to be obeyed. The world seemed to hold its breath. Sarah lay still, clutching her ribs but watching, her eyes wide not with fear, but with trust. Trust in the man she'd seen wrestling with peace for years, now standing exactly where he was meant to be. Troy backed up a step, then another. He turned to Cal, whose eyes were red and streaming, and hissed, "Let's go." They stumbled toward the Malibu, their retreat sloppy, desperate. But Ethan didn't lower the rifle. Not yet. His heartbeat was steady, his breathing measured. He'd already learned once in life that you can't take your eyes off a threat until it's gone. And as the car door slammed and the engine roared to life, he realized something profound. The quiet life he'd built was never meant to erase who he was. It was meant to give that part of him purpose when the time came, and that time, he knew, had arrived. For a brief moment, time stretched thin, like the air itself understood that something irreversible was about to happen. Ethan stood on the porch, fingers wrapped around the cold steel of his M4. The weight felt both foreign and familiar, like shaking hands with an old ghost. It wasn't rage that filled him. It was focus. His breath slowed, heartbeat steady, mind stripped of noise. Every lesson drilled into him during those years overseas came flooding back. Not as memory, but as instinct. This was what clarity under fire felt like. The world narrows until only the essentials remain. Target, movement, consequence. The metallic click of the safety disengaging echoed louder than the chaos unfolding before him. It was the sound of transformation, the civilian fading, the soldier returning. His feet were grounded, posture stable, elbows locked in deliberate geometry. His eyes never left the car where Troy and Cal scrambled, slamming the doors, shouting orders to each other. The engine coughed to life, the gray Malibu shaking as if it too sensed the gravity of what was coming. "Stop the car!" Ethan called out, voice even, controlled, but edged with command. "Step away." No tremor, no panic. It wasn't a plea, it was a directive, the kind that once cut through the noise of firefights in places the world preferred to forget. But the men didn't listen. They were too deep in adrenaline and arrogance, convinced they could still flee, still win. Cal wiped the last of the pepper spray from his eyes, slamming the gear shift into reverse. Tires screeched, gravel sprayed across the pavement. That was the moment the line was crossed. Something ancient settled inside Ethan. He inhaled once, the way he'd been trained, through the nose, slow and deliberate, letting oxygen feed calm instead of panic. The front sight post aligned perfectly with the edge of the car's fender. Every muscle in his body moved with precision, born of repetition. There was no anger, only execution. He squeezed the trigger, not yanked. The first round cracked through the air, controlled and exact. The sound rolled across the street like thunder chasing lightning. The impact jerked the car sideways, the front fender buckling inward. The second round shattered the passenger side mirror, glass exploding into a glittering cloud. Ethan adjusted by instinct, shifting half an inch to his right. The third shot punctured the hood, the sharp hiss of escaping coolant cutting through the silence that followed. He paused, half a heartbeat, then fired again. The fourth round hit the front tire, and the rubber peeled open like fruit under a blade. The car swerved violently, screeching against the curb. Fifth shot. The rear windshield disintegrated, shards catching sunlight as they scattered like falling ice. The sixth and final round tore through the trunk, embedding deep into the spare tire. The force of impact spun the Malibu halfway across the street, smoke coiling from the engine like the exhale of a defeated animal. 6 rounds. 6 seconds. Then silence. Ethan didn't move immediately. He stayed in his stance, muzzle steady, eyes locked on the car. Inside, movement. Troy's hands raised first, then Cal's, both stumbling out, coughing through the fumes. Their bravado was gone. The fake authority, the smirks, the posturing, all stripped away. What stood before him now were just men. Small, desperate, and exposed. The power dynamic had flipped entirely, not through brute force, but through precision and discipline. Ethan didn't gloat. He didn't shout. He simply lowered the rifle to his hip, thumb flicking the safety back on with the same calm he'd begun with. And yet, underneath that composure, something human still trembled. He turned his head toward Sarah, who sat propped against the porch railing, one hand clutching her ribs. Their eyes met. She wasn't afraid of him. She was anchored by him. In that look was everything unsaid. "I'm here. You're safe. We made it." Ethan knelt beside her, resting a hand lightly on her shoulder. The warmth of her skin reminded him that this wasn't combat. Not really. This was home. But the rules, it seemed, weren't so different. You protect your ground. You hold your line. You end the threat. The neighborhood had fallen eerily quiet. Curtains shifted in nearby windows, neighbors catching glimpses of something they'd later describe as a standoff or a self-defense incident. But what they wouldn't understand, what they couldn't, was how deliberate it all was. Every round Ethan fired had purpose. None to kill, all to disable. That discipline, restraint under pressure, was the truest expression of control. Violence wasn't what defined him. Control did. He exhaled slowly, the tension leaking from his shoulders. Sirens began to echo faintly in the distance, growing closer with each second. He placed the rifle on the porch floor beside him, safety engaged, muzzle down. Then he helped Sarah to her feet, steadying her as she leaned against him. She winced but managed a weak smile. 6 rounds? She whispered, voice rough but proud. 6, he said, with a nod that carried more emotion than any embrace could. The smoke from the Malibu drifted lazily upward, curling into the afternoon light. For Ethan, it was symbolic, chaos dissolving into calm. He'd been trained to survive ambushes, to act when hesitation meant death. But this felt different. This wasn't about survival. It was about reclaiming something sacred. He realized that peace wasn't the absence of violence. Peace was the confidence that, when tested, you could protect what mattered without losing yourself in the process. He glanced at the car one last time, its tires shredded, metal mangled, authority humbled. It wasn't revenge that settled over him, but release. For years, he had buried the soldier in favor of serenity. But now, he understood that the two could coexist. The protector wasn't the opposite of the peaceful man. He was the reason peace could exist at all. The sirens drew nearer until the sound filled the air, signaling the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Ethan straightened, hand still lightly resting on Sarah's back. Around them, the world seemed to return to motion. The hum of distant engines, the flutter of leaves, the heartbeat of normal life resuming. But something fundamental had shifted. He had acted not out of fear or fury, but purpose. And in doing so, he'd found a truth most people spend a lifetime running from. Sometimes, the calmest man in the room is also the most dangerous. The first sound after silence was the siren, a rising, distant wail cutting through the smoke and the smell of burnt rubber. It grew louder, sharper, until it seemed to vibrate through the air itself. Ethan didn't move. He stood on the porch, rifle lowered, safety on, hands visible. Years of training had taught him that after the action comes procedure. After chaos comes accountability. He spoke before anyone asked, voice clear and steady. "I'm the homeowner. Weapon is on safe." It wasn't panic. It was discipline. The kind born from knowing that survival doesn't end when the fight does. It ends when the truth is known. The first patrol car screeched to a halt, lights pulsing red and blue across the broken driveway. Officers shouted commands, their own adrenaline still peaking. Ethan complied, slow and deliberate, each motion telegraphing calm. He placed the M4 on the porch rail, palms out, body language open. "They attacked my wife," he said. "She's injured. Paramedics first." His tone wasn't defensive. It was authoritative, the kind that cuts through confusion. And within seconds, the energy shifted. One of the officers stepped forward, hand to his radio, calling for medical support. Authority recognizes authority, even unspoken. Sarah was loaded onto a stretcher minutes later, her face pale but eyes alert. She caught Ethan's sleeve as they lifted her, whispering through clenched pain, "Don't let them twist it." He nodded once. It wasn't just reassurance, it was a promise. The men on the ground, Troy and Cal, were handcuffed and silent. One groaned through pepper-burned eyes. The other sat with his head low, chest heaving. The air smelled of metal and motor oil and justice. The raw, unfiltered kind. Detective Holloway arrived not long after, a veteran of the job, gray hair cut close, voice measured. He questioned Ethan on the porch, asking for his statement while forensics began photographing the car. Ethan's answers were concise. 6 rounds, controlled fire, aimed only to disable the vehicle. He spoke in the language of precision, not emotion. Holloway listened, eyes flicking between the rifle, the shattered Malibu, and the line of bullet holes that told a story of restraint, not rage. When an officer called out from the car, "Detective! We've got something here." The tone of the scene shifted again. From the trunk, they pulled a small handgun, a stack of counterfeit HOA badges, and a bag filled with stolen mail, addresses circled in red marker. It wasn't random. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was premeditated intimidation. Holloway glanced at Ethan, then at the evidence, and for the first time since arriving, he nodded. Not as approval, but acknowledgement. "Looks like you had reason to be ready," he said. That night, Ethan sat in an interview room beneath fluorescent lights, the kind that hum just enough to keep you uneasy. His lawyer, Mark Halpern, a former JAG officer with the calm of a man who's seen too much, walked in with the confidence of someone who already knew how this story would end. "Texas Castle Doctrine," he said, setting his briefcase down. "You were in your home, on your property, responding to an assault. They were armed. You fired to disable, not kill. You did exactly what the law expects from a trained man protecting his family." It wasn't comfort, it was clarity. Ethan didn't want sympathy. He wanted truth to stand on its own feet. The district attorney tried to challenge that clarity. In the days that followed, media headlines spun the story every direction. Some calling Ethan a hero, others questioning his judgment. The DA argued that a Navy SEAL didn't need a gun to neutralize two men. Couldn't he have subdued them barehanded? The prosecutor asked during the hearing. Halpern's reply was simple and surgical. The law doesn't ask citizens to gamble with their lives, even if they're trained to fight. It asks them to stop a threat. He did that. The case turned not on rhetoric, but on evidence. Forensic analysis confirmed that every round had struck non-vital areas of the vehicle. Calculated, controlled. The knife recovered from Cal's belt and the handgun from the car sealed the narrative. This was not overreaction. It was survival. The defense rested on one word, proportionate, and Ethan's every action had embodied it. But the final nail came from Troy himself. Under oath, in a faded orange jumpsuit, he broke. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe the weight of Caney's manipulation finally caught up. He confessed that he and Cal had been hired by Richard Kane to intimidate homeowners into selling. He said make them scared, just enough so they'd move, Troy muttered, eyes downcast. When asked how much he was paid, he answered, envelope full of cash, at the bar on Highway 12. Halpern produced phone records, messages from a contact labeled RK, and bank transactions tying it all together. The conspiracy unraveled in real time. Caney's empire of coercion collapsed like a structure built on sand. 2 weeks later, the DA's office dropped all charges against Ethan. The ruling was definitive, justified under the Castle Doctrine. Troy and Cal were convicted of aggravated assault and attempted robbery. Caney faced charges of conspiracy and solicitation. Justice, in its slow, deliberate way, had caught up to greed. When Ethan walked out of the courthouse, sunlight hit his face differently. It wasn't triumph, he felt, it was restoration. The system had tested him, not just legally, but morally. Was he justified? Had he gone too far? Those questions lingered, not as doubts, but as reminders. Peace, he realized, isn't passive. It's protected by those willing to stand their ground when others won't. And sometimes, doing what's right means trusting both your instincts and the law to meet in the same place. The body learns to heal before the mind does. Weeks later, Sarah's laughter returned in fragments. First a soft breath at a joke, then a real laugh that tugged at the bandage without breaking it. Routine formed around tenderness. Slow walks at dusk, careful stretches, the clink of a spoon in tea. Pain alarms went from hourly to occasional to forgotten. She began leaving the blinds open again. Peace didn't arrive all at once. It seeped back like sunlight through leaves. Every ordinary moment felt like a small ceremony, a way of saying, we are still here, and we are not afraid to keep living. Ethan carved the plaque on a quiet afternoon, with the garage door raised to the hum of the street. He chose cedar for steadiness and cut the letters slow and square. This home is protected by righteous fury. He sanded the edges until they felt like something you could trust with bare hands. When he mounted it above the hidden panel on the porch, Sarah stood beside him, her fingers resting on the grain. It's not a threat, she said. It's a promise, he nodded. The sign wasn't about violence, it was about love willing to stand guard. People imagine healing as a return, but healing is an arrival. Ethan realized he had spent years trying to exile the part of himself that knew how to stand a post. He once believed peace required erasure. Now he understood peace required integration. The protector and the husband weren't rival identities. They were the same man with different assignments. That insight loosened a knot he hadn't been able to name. Guilt softened into gratitude. Readiness no longer felt like paranoia. It felt like fidelity. To vows, to home, to the person who trusted him with her breath. Some evenings he still listened for the Malibu's low hum, a ghost noise stitched into memory. It never returned. Even so, he kept the habits that had saved them. The porch light on a timer, the safe locked but reachable, the quiet practice of scanning without living in fear. He found a calm that was watchful rather than brittle. If you have ever carried responsibility, you know this shift. You stop asking the world to be easy and start asking yourself to be prepared. That is not cynicism. That is stewardship, the adult shape of hope. Sarah's resilience changed the house. She planted rosemary by the steps and strung wind chimes from seashells gathered on a trip they almost canceled. When the breeze moved, the chimes sang a thin, bright music that made strangers pause on the sidewalk. She framed a photo from her release day, not to glorify pain, but to mark victory. On the back she wrote one line, "We go home stronger." It wasn't bravado. It was a boundary. Even their quiet had edges now, defined by experience and protected by intention. On warm nights they sat on the porch, while the plaque caught the last light. Sometimes a neighbor asked about it. Ethan would smile and say, "It means we know where the line is." He didn't add more. The message wasn't for visitors. It was for them. A reminder that peace is not the absence of threat, but the presence of guardianship. And if their future children ever asked, he would tell them a simple truth. Love is not fragile. It is fierce enough to keep watch, gentle enough to heal, wise enough to never ignore its own warning bells. At sunset, the neighborhood sounded like it did in the beginning. Sprinklers whispering, a dog 2 houses down, distant tires on warm asphalt. The same music as before, but transformed because they were transformed. Ethan looked at Sarah, her profile lit gold, and understood the lesson he wanted you to carry. Do not wait for fear to leave before you live. Live, and bar the door against it. When a faint engine passed far away, he noted it and let it go. The porch held, the plaque held, and within that readiness, their peace finally felt complete. In the end, peace didn't sound like silence. It sounded like breathing, slow, steady, earned. The world around them moved on, lawns trimmed, mail delivered, children laughing down the street as if nothing had happened. But for Ethan and Sarah, everything had changed. Their story wasn't about violence. It was about the cost of ignoring instincts, about how danger often arrives wearing a polite smile and holding a clipboard. It's unsettling, isn't it? How ordinary evil can look, how quickly safety can fracture when trust is misplaced. Yet, the real power of their story isn't in the chaos. It's in what they rebuilt after it. Ethan never called himself a hero, and maybe that's what made him one. He didn't fight for glory. He fought for restoration. What the world saw as a dramatic act of self-defense, he saw as a return to purpose, a reconnection with the part of him he once tried to bury. And that's something we all face in our own ways, isn't it? The parts of ourselves we try to silence because they don't fit neatly into comfort. But when life tests us, those same buried parts often rise, not to destroy peace, but to protect it. That's the paradox of strength. Sarah understood that too. Her recovery wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. She learned that bravery doesn't always look like standing tall. Sometimes it looks like choosing to keep your heart open after it's been broken. The two of them didn't go back to who they were before. They became something stronger, something honest. Because once you've stared into chaos and survived, you stop mistaking quiet for weakness. You start understanding that calm is a discipline, not an accident. So when people ask what happened that day, Ethan rarely gives details. He just says, "Sometimes the monsters wear badges." Then he pauses, looking toward the porch where sunlight touches the plaque above the hidden safe, and adds softly, "And sometimes the heroes hang theirs on the wall." It's a truth that lingers, because heroism isn't about the moment you draw your weapon. It's about the life you build once it's put away.